The significance of Rajab and sacred months in Islam. Allah's choosing is a fundamental aspect of His lordship. This selection reflects the perfection of His wisdom, knowledge, and power. It demonstrates His unique ability to designate significance to times and events. This divine selection is not arbitrary, but divinely ordained. The Quran specifies that there are 12 months in a year. Among these 12, 4 months are designated as sacred. These sacred months hold a special religious status. The designation of these months is divinely ordained. This is mentioned specifically in Surah At-Tawbah. Believers are expected to respect the sanctity of these months as part of Allah's divine plan. Rajab is recognized as one of the sacred months in Islamic tradition. Its designation as sacred highlights its spiritual significance within the faith. This status encourages Muslims to acknowledge the month's inherent value. During Rajab, Muslims are urged to abstain from wrongdoing. This emphasis on avoiding negative actions aligns with Quranic teachings. Observing these guidelines is seen as a way to honor the sanctity of Rajab. The sacred months in Islam. The sacred months are 4 months in the Islamic calendar recognized for their religious importance. The Quran references these months, while the Sunnah specifies their names. These months are Dhul Qa'dah, Dhul Hijjah, Muharram, and Rajab. Dhul Qa'dah, Dhul Hijjah, and Muharram occur consecutively in the Islamic calendar. Rajab is positioned between the months of Jumada and Shaban. These months are considered sacred and hold a special place in Islamic tradition. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, referenced the sacred months in his farewell sermon. He stressed the need to preserve the original order of the Islamic calendar. The tribe of Mudar was distinguished for their adherence to the correct timing of Rajab. Other Arab tribes often manipulated the calendar months to suit their warfare practices. These adjustments were in contradiction to Islamic principles. Islam prohibits altering the sacred months for personal or tribal advantages. The Quran addresses the alteration of the sacred months in Surah At-Tawbah 9:37. This verse condemns the practice of changing the order of the sacred months. Altering the divinely ordained sequence is considered an act of disbelief. The prohibition reinforces the sanctity of these specific periods. Changing the months to suit worldly affairs is strictly forbidden. The reason why Rajab is given this name. The name Rajab is derived from the Arabic root Rajim Ba. This root signifies supporting and strengthening. Rajab tu al-Shay translates to I venerated it. The month was named Rajab because it was held in high esteem. This veneration is recognized and respected within Islamic Sharia. In the pre-Islamic era, the month of Rajab held special significance. Rajab was known as Munasil al-Asinna, a descriptive title reflecting a unique custom. The name translates to the one that causes the sharp heads of weapons to be taken off. People would symbolically dismantle their spears and arrows during this month. This involved removing the metal heads from their weapons. This practice represented a temporary cessation of hostilities and conflict. The people of the Jahiliyyah, pre-Islamic Arabia, held sacred months in high esteem. Rajab was a particularly venerated month among them. Warfare was forbidden during Rajab, reflecting its sanctity. People generally refrained from fighting, promoting peace in Rajab. the sanctity of Rajab and sacred months in Islam. Rajab is recognized as one of the sacred months in Islam. This month is accorded a special status within Islamic tradition. Its sanctity is emphasized by its inclusion among other revered months. This designation calls for increased mindfulness and respect. Muslims are encouraged to heighten their spiritual observances during Rajab. Acts of worship and reflection are considered particularly virtuous in this period. Surah Al-Ma'idah 5-2 prohibits violating the sanctity of the sacred months. This entails respecting the boundaries set by Allah in Islamic teachings. It involves avoiding actions and beliefs that contravene Islamic principles. Upholding the reverence due to these designated periods is essential. Surah At-Tawbah 9:36 highlights the significance of avoiding wrongdoing, especially during the sacred months. Wrongdoing includes committing sins, which are considered more serious during these holy periods. The increased weight of sins during the sacred months is due to the sanctity of the time. This requires heightened vigilance in adhering to Islamic principles and avoiding sinful actions. Therefore, Muslims are urged to be extra cautious and mindful of their actions during the sacred months. Fighting during sacred months. Islamic jurisprudence. Quranic verse 2-217 initially forbids combat during sacred months. This verse considers fighting in sacred months a severe violation. The majority of Islamic scholars interpret this prohibition as superseded. Later verses 9-5 command fighting against the mushrikeen. This indicates a contextual shift in permissibility regarding combat. Therefore, the initial prohibition is understood to be conditional based on subsequent revelations. A minority view exists regarding the permissibility of initiating hostilities during sacred months. This view asserts that starting conflict in sacred months is not allowed. However, continuing a conflict that began before the sacred month is permissible under this view. This interpretation uses the Prophet's PBUH battle against Al-Ta'if as an example. The battle against Al-Ta'if, initiated earlier, extended into a sacred month, thus supporting this view. The Islamic perspective on Atira sacrifices in Rajab. During the Jahiliyyah period, pre-Islamic Arabs engaged in various religious practices. One such practice was Atira, a form of sacrifice offered to idols. These sacrifices were typically performed in the month of Rajab. Atira was considered an integral part of their worship rituals. This tradition reflected the polytheistic beliefs prevalent before the rise of Islam. The advent of Islam brought about the abolishment of offering sacrifices to entities other than Allah. Islamic teachings underscore that all acts of worship must be directed exclusively to Allah. This includes the act of sacrifice, which is considered a form of worship. Directing sacrifices solely to Allah eliminates practices associated with idolatry. It also eradicates practices linked to polytheism, which involves worshipping multiple deities. This reform was a key aspect of establishing monotheistic worship in accordance with Islamic principles. Islamic scholars have different opinions on the Atira sacrifice. Most scholars, including Hanafis, Malikis, and Hanbalis, believe it is no longer required. Their view is based on hadith, which they interpret as abrogating the practice. However, Shafa'is consider the Atira sacrifice as recommended. They cite hadith suggesting the Prophet Muhammad, PBUH, did not abolish sacrifice in principle, but discouraged specifying it for Rajab. Fasting in Rajab. Islamic perspectives. Authentic Islamic sources do not specify any particular virtue in fasting during Rajab. This includes the teachings of the Prophet and his companions. Prescribed fasting, like Mondays and Thursdays, applies to all months. Fasting the 3 days of Al-Bid is also applicable across all months. Alternate day fasting and fasting Sirar al-Shah are not specific to Rajab. Umar forbade fasting specifically in the month of Rajab. This prohibition was due to its resemblance to pre-Islamic practices, Jahiliyyah. Historical accounts show Umar actively discouraged fasting in Rajab. He emphasized that fasting in Rajab lacked an Islamic basis and was associated with outdated traditions. Leading Islamic scholars like Imam Ibn al-Qayyim do not encourage fasting in Rajab. Authentic hadith do not support the practice of fasting specifically in Rajab. Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar also affirms the lack of encouragement for Rajab fasting. Fatawa al-Lajna al-Da'ima states there is no basis in Sharia for fasting in Rajab. This reinforces the consensus against assigning special religious significance to fasting in Rajab. Therefore, fasting in Rajab lacks authoritative support within Islamic scholarship. The validity of performing Umrah in Rajab. Hadith sources present varying accounts regarding the Prophet Muhammad's performance of Umrah in Rajab. Some narrations suggest the Prophet, peace be upon him, performed Umrah during the month of Rajab. Conversely, other accounts, such as those attributed to Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, deny this occurrence. This discrepancy underscores the necessity of critically evaluating hadith narrations. Understanding the context and chain of narration is crucial for verifying religious practices. Islamic scholars, such as al-Nawawi, interpret Ibn Umar's silence as uncertainty about the Prophet's actions regarding Rajab. This silence suggests no specific preference was given to performing Umrah in Rajab. Therefore, designating Rajab for Umrah, believing it has special merit, lacks proper Islamic basis. Such a practice is considered a bid'ah, innovation, due to the absence of supporting evidence in Islamic teachings. Performing Umrah in the month of Rajab is permissible in Islam. This permissibility is contingent on the intention behind the act. It is acceptable if the timing is merely for convenience. It is not acceptable if one believes Rajab holds special religious significance for Umrah. The key factor is whether special virtue is attributed to Rajab. If no specific virtue is assigned, performing Umrah in Rajab is permissible. Religious innovations, bid'ah, in Rajab. A critical examination. Religious innovation, bid'ah, is viewed as contradictory to the Quran and Sunnah. Islam was perfected during the Prophet Muhammad's time, according to Al-Ma'idah 5-3. The Prophet Muhammad emphasized adherence to established religious practices. He discouraged deviations or innovations not part of Islam. Any innovation not part of Islam will be rejected. Salat al-Raghaib is a prayer that originated and became popular after the early centuries of Islam, specifically in the month of Rajab. Prominent scholars, including Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, have classified Salat al-Raghaib as a bid'ah, innovation in religious matters. This classification is supported by a consensus among scholars from different schools of thought, including Malik, al-Shafi'i, and Abu Hanifa. Hadith scholars consider the narrations associated with Salaat al-Raghaib to be fabricated.